are men born to belong to mountains, and there are women strong enough to stand beside them. This is the story of both. The crack of a rifle echoed through the Colorado Rockies, sharp as winter-breaking ice. November 1883. The snow had come early that year, heavy and merciless, draping the high country in silence. Jacob Stone heard the scream from 200 yards up the ridge. He had been tracking a bull elk since dawn, moving through the timber like smoke given form. At 33, Jacob had lived alone in these mountains for 2 years. Ever since fever took his wife and left him with nothing but wind and the weight of memory. Ever since the day he stopped being a man and became a ghost. But they still called him the Mountain King, not because he claimed the title. Kings crowned themselves with gold and ceremony. Jacob Stone had earned his crown through winters that broke lesser men, through skills no academy could teach, through a reputation that traveled faster than any telegraph wire. From the mining camps of Leadville to the trading posts of Durango, men spoke his name with reverence or fear depending on which side of right they stood. He was a big man, 6 feet 2 inches of muscle and bone shoulders broad enough to carry a deer whole down a mountain slope. His black hair hung past his collar, usually tied back with leather cord. His beard grew thick and wild, covering half his face, shot through with premature silver. His eyes were the pale gray of winter ice, and they missed nothing. He wore buckskin and homespun wool, carried a Winchester rifle that never jammed, and moved through the forest like he had been born from it. The scream made him forget the elk entirely. Jacob worked his way down the slope in long, controlled strides, boots finding purchase on frozen ground. His rifle came up instinctively, finger resting alongside the trigger guard. 20 years of living hard had taught him that screams in the wilderness meant one of two things: death had already come, or death was coming soon. When he reached the edge of the ravine, he saw it all laid out below him like a painting of hell rendered in snow and blood and splintered wood. A carriage lay on its side, one wheel still spinning slowly in the cold air. The wheel was fine work, expensive work, Studebaker craftsmanship if Jacob's eye was true. The body of the carriage was painted deep burgundy with gold scrollwork, now scarred and dented from the fall. The matching chestnut mare thrashed in the traces, panicking, her breath coming in great plumes of steam. 3 men on horseback surrounded the wreck, and a woman was pinned beneath the overturned carriage bed. Even from this distance, even through the blood pumping hard in his ears, Jacob could see she was pregnant. The men had not noticed him yet. They were arguing about something, gesturing at the woman at the scattered contents of the carriage. Fabric bolts lay strewn across the snow like fallen flags. A leather case had burst open, spilling thread and needles that glinted in the weak sunlight. Carpet bags and wooden boxes lay crushed against the rocks. One of the men dismounted, moving toward the woman with purpose that made Jacob's jaw clench. He did not think. Thinking was for men who had something to lose. Jacob raised the Winchester and fired once into the air. The shot boomed across the ravine, echoing off stone, and all 3 men jerked their heads toward the sound. Jacob fired again, this time close enough that snow kicked up near the lead horse's hooves. The animal reared, nearly throwing its rider. "Next one finds flesh," Jacob called out. His voice carried the authority of a man who never bluffed, who never needed to. The 3 men exchanged looks. They were rough types, the kind who drifted through mining towns looking for easy money. Beards, unkempt clothes worn, eyes calculating. One started to raise his pistol, thinking distance made him brave. The leader shook his head, sharp and quick. They were not being paid enough to die today. Not with the Mountain King's rifle trained on them from high ground. They wheeled their horses and rode hard down the trail, disappearing into the timber without looking back. Jacob descended the ravine in controlled slides, using saplings to break his momentum. Snow and pine needles cascaded around him. His breath came steady despite the speed. When he reached the bottom, he moved immediately to the woman rifle, still ready in case the 3 came back with reinforcements. Up close, the situation looked worse. The carriage had hit a patch of ice on the narrow mountain pass and gone over sideways. The fall was maybe 20 feet, not enough to kill, but enough to destroy. The mare was badly cut from the traces, bleeding from a dozen small wounds. And the woman beneath the carriage was conscious, her green eyes winning with pain and fear, and something else, something harder: determination. She was young, maybe 25, maybe less. Dark hair had come loose from its pins and framed a face that would have been beautiful if it was not pale with shock. Her dress was good quality traveling clothes made for comfort and durability, now torn and stained with mountain dirt. Her belly showed clear, even under her winter coat. 6 months along, Jacob judged. Maybe 7. Hold still, he said, dropping to his knees beside her. Where does it hurt? My leg. Her voice came through gritted teeth. Cannot feel my leg. The carriage bed had her pinned from the waist down. Jacob examined the situation quickly with the practiced eye of a man who had pulled wounded soldiers from collapsed trenches during the Indian Wars. If he lifted wrong, the whole thing could shift and crush her worse. But snow was melting where her body heat touched it, and he could see she was shaking hard. Shock setting in. What is your name? He asked, already moving to brace the carriage. Vivian, she gasped as pain lanced through her. Vivian Ashford. People call me Vivi. Well, Vivi Ashford, I am going to lift this off you now. When I do, you pull yourself free. Can you do that? She nodded, teeth chattering. Jacob positioned himself, set his feet in the snow, and heaved. The muscles in his back and shoulders screamed as he took the weight of the carriage. It was solid construction, heavy oak and iron built to last generations. It lifted 6 inches, then a foot. His arms trembled with the strained veins standing out on his forearms. Now, he grunted. Vivi dragged herself backward through the snow, crying out when her left leg came free. The sound she made was raw and animal, but she did not stop moving until she was clear. Jacob let the carriage down carefully and went to her immediately. Her left leg was bent at a bad angle below the knee. Her face had gone the color of old milk. But when he checked her belly with gentle hands, feeling for the hardness that would mean internal bleeding, she seemed intact. The baby seemed intact. The baby, she whispered. Fear made her eyes enormous. Baby feels fine to me, strong. Jacob kept his voice calm and steady, the way he had learned to do when calming spooked horses or wounded men. But we need to get you warm and get that leg set. My cabin is a mile from here. Can you ride? I think so. The mare was beyond saving. One of her front legs was broken bones showing white through the skin, and she thrashed in agony in the traces. Jacob hated this part, but there was no mercy in leaving her to suffer. He drew his Colt revolver and put her down with one shot, quick and clean. Vivi flinched at the sound but said nothing. Her jaw was set hard. Jacob gathered what he could from the wreckage. Most of her belongings were ruined or scattered beyond finding in the snow. But he salvaged a carpet bag with some clothes, and miraculously the leather sewing case had survived intact. He strapped everything to his pack. Then he noticed the carriage itself. Even destroyed, even on its side in the snow, it was remarkable work. The wood was tiger maple, expensive and beautiful, with brass fittings that spoke of master craftsmanship. The wheel that had broken showed signs of deliberate construction, each spoke fitted with precision Jacob recognized. This was not just transportation. This was art. I need the carriage, Vivi said suddenly. Her voice was stronger now, fighting through the pain. I cannot leave it. Ma'am, it is broken past repair. We need to get you warm. And you do not understand. She grabbed his arm with surprising strength. The carriage itself is my inheritance. My grandfather built it. There are things inside it, hidden. I must have it. Jacob looked at her, looked at the destroyed carriage, looked at the snow beginning to fall again. Can you point me to what you need from it? All of it, the whole carriage, or I have nothing. There was something in her eyes that stopped his protest, a kind of desperate certainty that he recognized because he had worn it himself once. The look of someone who had lost everything and was clinging to the last thing that mattered. I will come back for it, he said, after you are safe. She searched his face, then nodded once. Jacob lifted her as carefully as he could. She was light in his arms, too light for a woman carrying a child. He could feel her trembling, going into shock despite her strength. He needed to move fast. The mile back to his cabin was the longest of Jacob Stone's life, not because of the distance or the weight. He had carried wounded men twice Vivi's size through worse terrain, but because with every step he was aware of the life he carried. 2 lives, a woman and an unborn child, both fragile as new snow, both depending on him not to fail. He had failed before. His wife's face flashed in his memory, pale with fever, begging him to ride for the doctor, and him too proud, too certain he could treat her himself with mountain remedies. By the time he admitted defeat and rode for help, it was too late. He would not fail again. Jacob's cabin sat in a clearing halfway up the next ridge built from squared logs and chinked with moss. Smoke rose from the stone chimney. He had banked the fire that morning, but it would still be warm inside. He carried Vivi through the door and laid her on the bed. It was a simple frame strung with rope and covered with deer hides and wool blankets. The cabin was one room, maybe 20 feet square. Rough furniture he had made himself. Hunting gear hung on the walls alongside drying herbs and strips of venison. It smelled like wood smoke and leather and the wild medicines he gathered from the forest. Vivi surveyed the space, taking it in with those sharp green eyes. You live here alone, 2 years now. They say you are the Mountain King. Her words came through pain, but there was curiosity there too. Are you... Oh, Jacob built up the fire, adding larger logs until heat began to fill the room. I'm just a man who lives in the mountains. Other people gave me that name. Why? He did not answer that. Instead, he put water on to boil and mixed a tea from willow bark and mint. Drink this. It will help with the pain. She took the cup, her fingers trembling. The tea was bitter, and she made a face, but she kept drinking. While the willow bark did its work, numbing her pain, Jacob checked her leg. It was broken clean, which was good. The bone had not pierced the skin, which was better. He had set worse. He worked carefully, feeling along the break, judging the angle. Vivi watched him with those green eyes that missed nothing. You have done this before, she observed. Army scout, Indian wars years back. Field medicine was part of the job. He splinted the leg with straight branches and strips of cloth torn from an old shirt. She bit down on a leather strap when he set the bone and did not scream, which told him she was tougher than she looked. When it was done, she lay back exhausted. Color had returned to her face. The shaking had stopped. Where were you headed? Jacob asked. Silverton. I bought land there, sight unseen through a letter. She touched her belly unconsciously. I am going to open a dress shop. I need steady work before this one comes. You are a seamstress. Trained in Boston. My husband was an engineer on the railroad. Her voice caught. He died 7 months ago. Accident at a rail yard. I am sorry. Jacob knew the weight of those words. My wife passed 2 years back. Fever took her in 3 days. They sat in silence after that, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who understood loss, who knew that some griefs were too big for talking. Outside, the wind picked up. Snow began to fall, visible through the cabin's single window. Big wet flakes that would pile up fast. Storm coming, Jacob said. You will need to stay here tonight. Maybe tomorrow too if it is bad. I will take you down to Silverton when the weather clears. Vivi nodded, already half asleep from the willow bark tea and exhaustion. Jacob covered her with another blanket, then moved to the far side of the cabin to give her privacy. He sat in his chair by the fire and worked on repairing a pair of snowshoes, the rawhide lacing smooth and familiar in his scarred hands. The firelight played across the rough log walls. Outside, the storm built its strength. And in the bed across the room, Vivian Ashford slept and dreamed of things Jacob would never know. When she woke the next morning, pale sunlight streamed through the window. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried in fresh snow. The smell of frying venison and cornmeal cakes filled the cabin. How is the leg? Jacob asked when he saw her eyes open. Hurts, but better than yesterday. She struggled to sit up, wincing. There is a privy out back. I will help you. He supported her weight as she hobbled outside, and back, his touch impersonal and respectful. When she was settled again by the fire, he handed her a plate of food and a cup of coffee so strong it could have stripped paint. Vivi ate like she was starving, which she probably was. When she finished, she wiped her mouth and looked at him directly. You have been very kind, but I cannot stay here imposing on you. I have business in Silverton. Snow is too deep. Give it a day for the trails to pack down, and I will take you on my horse. I have money. I can pay you for your trouble. Jacob shook his head. Do not want money. Then what do you want? He thought about that. What did he want? For 2 years, he had wanted nothing except to be left alone with his grief and his mountains. But this woman, pregnant, determined, utterly alone, stirred feelings in his chest he thought were dead. Nothing, he said finally. Just trying to help. Vivi studied him with those sharp green eyes like she was reading a book written in his face. You are not what I expected when I pictured a mountain man. What did you expect? Someone rougher, meaner. She smiled a little. More likely to eat me than help me. Jacob felt his mouth twitch. It might have been the start of a smile. He could not remember the last time he had smiled. I only eat people on Tuesdays. Today is Thursday. She laughed surprised and the sound filled the cabin like music. It had been a long time since there had been laughter in this place. They spent the day in quiet companionship. Jacob showed her his collection of medicinal herbs, explaining what each was for. Yarrow for bleeding, golden seal for infection, wild ginger for nausea. Vivi told him about Boston, about growing up in a house with servants and going to a proper school, about meeting Thomas Ashford at a church social and falling in love with his plans to build railroads across the Western territories. He promised me adventure, she said, staring into the fire. He kept that promise, just not the way either of us expected. By evening, she had noticed the tear in Jacob's buckskin jacket and asked for her sewing kit. He brought it to her watching as she opened the leather case and examined the contents with the focused attention of a master examining her tools. Scissors, needles of different sizes, thread in a dozen colors. Her fingers moved across them with practiced confidence. This is torn badly, she said, examining the jacket. But I can fix it, make it stronger than before. She worked by firelight while Jacob carved a new trigger guard for his rifle. The only sounds were the pop and hiss of burning wood, the whisper of needle through leather, the soft scrape of his knife on walnut. Outside, a wolf howled somewhere in the distance. Another answered. Do you get lonely? Vivi asked suddenly. Living up here alone, Jacob considered the question. Sometimes, but loneliness is better than the wrong kind of company. I understand that. She nodded off a thread and started another seam. In Boston, after Thomas died, I was surrounded by people. But I have never felt more alone in my life. Everyone had advice. Everyone knew what I should do. Nobody asked what I wanted. What do you want, Dayitbuin? To make my own way. To prove I can provide for my child without depending on anyone's charity or judgment. She held up the jacket, examining her work in the firelight. To build something that is mine. Jacob took the jacket and turned it over in his hands. The repair was invisible. The stitches small and perfect, stronger than the original. You are good at this. It is what I know how to do. And in Silverton, I will have customers. The land agent's letter said it is a growing town. Railroad coming through. People will need clothes made and mended. Her tone worried him. You sound uncertain. The land I bought, I have never seen it. What if it is no good? What if the whole thing was a mistake? Then you will figure something else out. Jacob met her eyes. You seem like someone who figures things out. Something passed between them then. Understanding, recognition, the acknowledgement that they were both survivors. Both people who had been broken and put themselves back together with whatever materials were at hand. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Jacob saddled his horse, a big roan gelding named Red, and helped Vivi mount. She sat in front of him, her injured leg supported by a sling. He had rigged her back, pressed against his chest. They descended the mountain slowly, Red picking his way carefully through the snow. The sky was impossibly blue, and ice glittered on every branch and needle. Vivi gasped at the beauty of it, and Jacob saw his mountains through her eyes for the first time in 2 years. Saw them as something other than a place to hide. Silverton appeared below them as they rounded the last bend. It was a mining town carved into the mountainside, maybe 300 souls clustered along the valley floor. Wood smoke rose from 100 chimneys. A church steeple pointed at the sky. Jacob could see the main street with its handful of businesses. General store. Boarding house. What looked like a doctor's office. And standing in front of the boarding house, watching their approach with calculating eyes, was a man in a fine black suit. Jacob felt Vivi stiffen in his arms. That is him, she whispered. Who? The land agent, Silas Blackthorne, the one who sold me the property. Silas Blackthorne was tall and well-dressed, maybe 45 years old. He had the smooth face of someone who made his living with words instead of hands. Silver threaded through his dark hair, carefully groomed. His suit was Eastern cut expensive wool. A gold watch chain glinted at his vest. As they approached, he smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. Mrs. Ashford, he called out, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. What a relief to see you have arrived safely. Though I must say your mode of transportation is rather unconventional. Vivi slid down from the horse with Jacob's help. She stood on her good leg using Jacob's arm for balance. My carriage was wrecked, Mr. Blackthorne. This gentleman was kind enough to assist me. Blackthorne's eyes moved to Jacob, taking in the buckskin, the beard, the rifle, dismissing him in an instant as beneath notice. How fortunate. Mountain men do have their uses. He turned back to Vivi, all polished concern. I am afraid I have some rather urgent business to discuss with you, my dear. Perhaps we could speak privately. Anything you need to say, you can say in front of Mr. Stone. The use of his name made Blackthorne pause. His smile tightened just a fraction. Very well. It concerns the property you purchased. There have been some developments. What kind of developments? The territorial government is planning significant expansion in this area. Mining operations, infrastructure, the railroad you mentioned. Your land, unfortunately, lies directly in the path of several proposed routes. He pulled papers from his coat. They have the right of eminent domain, you understand. They can seize property for public use. Vivi's hand tightened on Jacob's arm. What does that mean? It means, Mrs. Ashford, that you may lose your investment entirely. However, he paused for effect. I represent a development consortium willing to purchase the land from you before that happens. We are prepared to offer fair market value. It would save you considerable trouble. How much? $200. Jacob felt anger kindle in his chest. He had seen enough land deals in mining country to know when someone was being cheated. Property in Silverton, even undeveloped, was worth 5 times that at minimum. If there was really a railroad coming, it could be worth 50 times that. I do not want to sell, Vivi said, her voice steady despite the fear Jacob could feel running through her. I came here to build a business. I understand your reluctance, truly I do, but I must advise you that time is not on your side. Blackthorne's tone was all manufactured sympathy. The surveyors will be here within the month. If you refuse to sell now, you may end up with nothing at all. Jacob had heard enough. He stepped forward, putting himself slightly between Vivi and Blackthorne. She said no. Blackthorne's eyes cut to him, and for just a moment the pleasant mask slipped. What showed underneath was cold and sharp as a January wind. I do not believe anyone asked for your opinion, Mr. Stone. Did not offer an opinion, just repeated what the lady said. The two men stared at each other. Jacob stood utterly still, relaxed in the way of men who knew violence intimately and were not afraid of it. Blackthorne was the first to look away. He turned back to Vivi, reaching into his coat to pull out folded papers. Mrs. Ashford, I strongly advise you to reconsider. The offer I am making is generous. More generous than you will find elsewhere. He held out the documents. Here are the details. Look them over. I will be staying at the boarding house for the next few days. When you are ready to discuss this rationally, you know where to find me. He walked away without waiting for a response, his boots clicking on the frozen ground with the precise rhythm of a man used to having his way. Vivi stared after him, her face troubled. Do you think he is telling the truth about the railroad? Jacob watched Blackthorne disappear into the boarding house. Maybe, but something about him does not sit right. What do you mean? I have known my share of snakes in the grass. That man is one of them. Can smell it. Vivi looked up at him. In her eyes he saw fear warring with determination. I cannot lose this land, Jacob. It is all I have, all my baby will have. The words were out before he thought them through. Then we will make sure you do not lose it. We. When had this become we? But watching Vivi stand straight despite her broken leg, seeing the stubborn set of her jaw, Jacob knew he was not walking away. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Come on, he said. Let us get you inside and find someone to look at that leg properly. Then we will figure out what Silas Blackthorne is really up to. They moved toward the boarding house together, and neither of them noticed Blackthorne watching from an upstairs window, his expression thoughtful and calculating. The boarding house belonged to a widow named Martha Hayes. She was a sturdy woman of 58 with silver hair and hands that had known hard work. She took one look at Vivi's splinted leg and clucked her tongue like a mother hen. Lord have mercy, child. What happened to you? Wagon accident, Vivi said. Mr. Stone was kind enough to help me. Martha's eyes moved to Jacob, taking in his buckskin and beard with the practiced assessment of someone who had seen all types pass through her door. Jacob Stone, have not seen you in town for near about 6 months. Been up in the high country. So I heard. She gestured them inside. Well, you did good bringing her here. Come on in, both of you. I will put the kettle on and send for Doc Finn to look at that leg proper. The boarding house was warm and clean, with the smell of bread baking and coffee on the stove. Martha settled Vivi in a room on the first floor, one with a window that looked out onto the main street. The bed had a real mattress stuffed with corn shucks, and there were curtains on the windows, cheerful yellow fabric that caught the afternoon light. You rest now, Martha said. I will fetch the doctor. When she was gone, Vivi looked around the room with something like wonder. I had forgotten what it was like. A real bed, curtains, the smell of bread baking. Jacob stood in the doorway, suddenly aware of how rough his cabin must have seemed to her, how primitive his way of living. If you need anything, you have already done more than enough, Vivi interrupted gently. I can manage from here. But he saw the way her hands shook as she tried to arrange the blankets, saw the exhaustion in her face. I will be at the general store if you need me, he said, getting supplies before I head back up the mountain. You are leaving. Something in her voice made him pause. Not quite fear, but close to it. Not right away. Storm is coming in tomorrow. Would be foolish to try the high trails in that. Relief flickered across her face there and gone so fast he might have imagined it. Of course. I just meant thank you. For everything. He nodded and left before he could say something he would regret. The general store was run by a man named Thompson, a cheerful soul who knew everyone's business and most of their secrets. Jacob was selecting coffee and tobacco when the door opened and Silas Blackthorne walked in. The two men acknowledged each other with nods that held no warmth. Blackthorne examined a display of tools with elaborate disinterest. Tell me, Mr. Stone, how long have you known Mrs. Ashford? About 2 days. Yet you seem quite protective of her. I am protective of anyone being pushed into something they do not want. Blackthorne smiled that cold smile. I am not pushing anyone, simply offering a business opportunity. The railroad is coming whether she sells or not. I am trying to help her get something for her property before the government takes it. Government moves slow, especially this far into the mountains. You would be surprised how fast things can move when there is money involved. Blackthorne paid for his purchases and turned to leave. At the door he paused. A word of advice, mountain man. Do not involve yourself in matters you do not understand. Mrs. Ashford's situation is delicate. She needs proper legal counsel, not the interference of well-meaning amateurs. When he was gone, Thompson whistled low. That is one smooth-talking snake if I ever heard one. You know him? Know of him? Been in town about a month buying up properties. Always has some story about the railroad or government land claims. Always offering cash money, quick sales, no questions asked. Thompson lowered his voice. Word is 3 families sold to him already. Now they are having second thoughts. But the papers are signed and the deals are done. Jacob felt his jaw tighten. What kind of second thoughts? The kind where they are wondering if maybe that railroad story was not quite as certain as Mr. Blackthorne made it sound. Jacob bought his supplies and left. But instead of heading back up the mountain, he found himself walking toward the boarding house, telling himself it was because of the weather, because Martha had offered him a room, because it would be rude to refuse. The truth was simpler and more complicated. He was not ready to leave Vivi alone with whatever Blackthorne was planning. That night, Jacob sat on the porch of the boarding house chair, tilted back against the wall rifle across his knees. The town was quiet. Lamplight glowed in windows. Somewhere a dog barked. The stars came out hard and bright in the cold air. Around midnight, he heard it. Footsteps. Careful. Trying to be quiet. 2 men moving through the shadows toward the boarding house. Jacob eased out of his chair without a sound. Years of hunting had taught him to move like smoke. He circled around behind them, Winchester ready. They were at Vivi's window when he spoke. Looking for something, boys. Both men spun around. One reached for a gun, but Jacob already had his rifle up. I would not. They were rough types, hired muscle, the kind of men who did dirty work for cash and did not ask questions. Jacob recognized the type because he had seen them before drifting through mountain towns, leaving trouble in their wake. We ain't doing nothing, one said. Just taking a walk. At midnight, outside a lady's window, with pry bars in your belts, the second man, bigger and meaner looking, took a step forward. Maybe you should mind your own business, old man. Jacob was 33, but he supposed to young men full of themselves that might seem old. He did not bother correcting them. This is my business now. You have got two choices. Walk away quiet or I start shooting. Do not much care which you pick. They looked at each other, looked at Jacob. Whatever they saw in his face made the decision for them. They backed away slowly, then turned and hurried off into the night. Jacob waited until he was sure they were gone, then checked the window. The latch had been jimmied, but they had not gotten it open before he stopped them. He secured it properly and went back to his chair. He did not sleep that night. In the morning, Vivi found him still on the porch, frost on his beard, the Winchester across his knees. You stayed, she said. Seemed like the thing to do. Did something happen? He told her about the men. Watch her face go pale, then flush with anger. Blackthorn sent them. He wants my land documents. Probably, but they did not get them. Where are the papers? She touched the front of her dress. In a pocket I sewed inside the lining. I am not a fool, Mr. Stone. I have traveled alone from Boston to Colorado. I know how to protect what is mine. Despite everything, Jacob found himself almost smiling. I believe you do. Dr. Marcus Finn arrived after breakfast. He was a spare man of 55 with steady hands and kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. He examined Vivi's leg with gentle efficiency, nodded approval at Jacob's splinting work, and rewrapped it properly. You will be off that leg for 6 weeks minimum, he said. Lucky it was a clean break. Could have been much worse. When Vivi mentioned Blackthorn and his offer, Doc's expression grew troubled. Mrs. Ashford, I wonder if I might speak with you privately. Vivi caught Jacob's hand. Please stay. I trust you. Doc looked between them, seemed to make a decision. He pulled a chair close and lowered his voice. What I am about to tell you could be dangerous if it gets back to the wrong people. Silas Blackthorn is not what he claims to be. He is not working for the government or any legitimate railroad company. He is a land speculator, and a dishonest one at that. How do you know? Vivi asked. Because I have been collecting evidence. 6 families in this area have sold land to him in the past 2 months. Every one of them was shown documents that appeared to be from official sources. Every document was a forgery. The word hung in the air like poison. Why has no one reported him? Jacob asked. To who the sheriff is on Blackthorn's payroll. The nearest federal marshal is in Denver, 3 days' ride. And the people he has cheated are mostly poor mining families who can barely read, let alone navigate legal proceedings against a man with money and connections. Vivi's hand tightened on Jacob's. What does he want with all this land? That is what I have been trying to figure out. There is talk of a railroad eventually coming through, but the route is not decided and will not be for years. My theory is that Blackthorn is buying up property cheap with fake documents, then planning to sell it later at huge profit when development does come. Or maybe he has some other scheme entirely. I do not know. But I do know he is a fraud and a criminal. Can you prove it? Jacob asked. I have copies of some of the forged documents. I have statements from 3 of the families he cheated, people willing to testify if given protection from retaliation. But I need more. I need an original document from the actual land office to compare with his forgeries. Something that will prove beyond doubt that his paperwork is fake. Vivi was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her dress and pulled out a folded paper. Would this help? It was her deed, the legitimate one from the Territorial Land Office in Denver. Doc unfolded it carefully, comparing it to papers he pulled from his own coat. His face grew grim. Look here. He pointed to Vivi's deed. This has the official seal embossed into the paper. It has a registration number that corresponds to the county records. And the signature of the land commissioner matches other legitimate documents I have seen. He pulled out one of Blackthorn's papers. Now look at this. The seal is printed, not embossed. The registration number does not match the county system. And this signature is a crude forgery. Anyone who knew what to look for could spot it immediately. Then why has no one stopped him? Anger edged Vivi's every word. Because most people do not know what to look for. And the ones who do, like the sheriff, are being paid to look the other way. Doc carefully refolded the papers. But with your legitimate deed for comparison and the testimony I have gathered, we might have enough to bring in a federal marshal, if we can get word to Denver. I will go, Jacob said. Both of them looked at him. I know the trails. Can make Denver in 2 days if I push hard. Another day to find the marshal and explain the situation. Be back here inside a week. That is too dangerous, Vivi protested. Blackthorn will... Blackthorn will not know I am gone until I am already there. And when I get back with federal law, it will not matter what he knows. Doc nodded slowly. It could work. Marshal Gideon Crane is a good man. By the book. If we can get the evidence to him, he will act on it. Then it is settled. Jacob stood. I leave at dawn. Vivi grabbed his arm, her grip fierce. Jacob, please, be careful. He looked down at her, at the fear and hope warring in her green eyes, at the stubborn set of her jaw and the way she held herself despite the pain and the pregnancy and all the weight she carried. I will be back, he said simply. I promise. That night, what remained of the boarding house's guests crowded into the small parlor. Martha served coffee and cornbread. Doc laid out the evidence he had collected, and slowly, carefully, they built a plan. Reverend Caleb Thornhill, a man of 67 with white hair and a voice that could shake rafters, listened to everything. When they finished, he walked to his bookshelf and returned with a leather-bound ledger. I have been keeping records, he said. Every suspicious land deal, every family pressured to sell, every time Blackthorn made promises that did not quite add up. It is all here. Names, dates, amounts. If what you are saying about forgery is true, this ledger will help prove a pattern of fraud. Doc took the ledger reverently. This is exactly what we need. Thank you, Reverend. Do not thank me. Thank God you got here before Blackthorn destroyed this whole community. The old preacher looked at Jacob. You will need supplies for the Denver ride. I will see what I can gather. And Mrs. Ashford, you will stay with my wife and me. Our home is small, but it is safe. They talked into the early hours planning and preparing. By the time Jacob finally stretched out on a pew in the church to catch a few hours of sleep, the first hint of dawn was touching the windows. Vivi sat nearby, wrapped in a borrowed blanket. She watched him with an expression he could not quite read. I am afraid, she said quietly, of Blackthorn, of him, of losing this land, the dream, the chance to build something for my baby. She paused, and afraid of you getting hurt because of me. Jacob sat up. I have been hurt before, survived it. That is not funny. As not trying to be funny. He looked at her directly. Listen, I spent 2 years hiding on my mountain, thinking if I just stayed away from people, I would not have to feel anything ever again. Then you came along and reminded me that there are things worth feeling, worth fighting for. So maybe I am doing this for you, or maybe I am doing it for me, but either way I am doing it. Vivi's eyes glistened with tears she refused to shed. When this is over, when Blackthorn is dealt with and I have my land secure. What then? What do you mean? Will you go back to your mountain, back to being alone? It was a fair question, one Jacob had been asking himself. The smart answer was yes, the safe answer. Go back to his cabin and his solitude and the life he had built from the wreckage of his grief. But facing Vivi now, he could not speak those words. I do not know, he said honestly, but I reckon I have got time to figure it out. Outside, the sky was turning gray with approaching dawn. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed. The town of Silverton was waking up to questions and fear and the promise of change. And Silas Blackthorn, sleeping peacefully in his hotel room, had no idea that the walls were closing in around him. Jacob left at dawn when the world was still gray and frost lay thick on everything. Red picked his way carefully down the mountain trail, breath steaming in the cold air. Behind them, Silverton grew smaller smoke, rising from 100 chimneys into the winter sky. The ride to Denver would take 2 hard days if the weather held. Jacob pushed Red as much as he dared, stopping only to rest and water the horse. He carried Doc's evidence in an oilskin pouch against his chest, along with Vivi's legitimate deed and Reverend Thornhill's ledger. 3 pieces of paper that could bring down a man's empire of lies. He thought about Vivi more than he wanted to admit. Thought about the way she had looked at him before he left, like she was trying to memorize his face. Thought about what it might mean if he came back and she was still there, still looking at him that way. Behind him in Silverton, Vivi moved into Reverend Thornhill's small house. His wife Ruth was a gentle woman who asked no questions and offered nothing but kindness. The house sat at the edge of town, backed up against the forest, with a view of the mountains that made Vivi's heart ache. She spent her time mending clothes for Ruth, her hands moving automatically through familiar work. It soothed her, gave her something to focus on besides worry. And worry she did. About Jacob riding alone through wilderness where Blackthorn's men might wait. About the land she had never seen, but already loved. About the baby growing inside her, and what kind of world she was bringing a child into. About the carriage still lying broken in the ravine. Her grandfather's masterwork. Her inheritance. The key to everything. She had not told Jacob the whole truth about the carriage. Yes, it contained hidden compartments with mining claim maps her husband Thomas had left her. But there was more. So much more. Thomas had been investigating Silas Blackthorn before he died, had discovered things, dangerous things. And in the last weeks of his life, Thomas had hidden evidence in the carriage itself. Not just in compartments, but carved into the very wood. Ciphers that only someone who knew what to look for could find. Thomas had shown her the basics before he died. Taught her to read the patterns in the grain, the careful burns and cuts that looked like natural variations, but were actually coded messages. The carriage was not just an inheritance. It was testimony. Proof of crimes that went far beyond simple land fraud. And it was still out there in the snow waiting. Vivi made a decision. When Jacob returned with the marshal, they would need more than forged documents and testimony. They would need the carriage. They would need what Thomas had hidden inside it, which meant someone would have to rebuild it, bring it back to Silverton intact. The thought terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure. She had never built anything in her life beyond dresses and curtains and the careful architecture of seams and hems. But Thomas had taught her to read the cipher. And Jacob had shown her in those quiet hours in his cabin that she was stronger than she knew. Maybe it was time to prove it. The first day passed in quiet preparation. The second day brought news. Dr. Finn came to the Reverend's house, his face grim. Blackthorn knows something is wrong. He has been asking questions, where Jacob went. Why you are staying here instead of the boarding house. His men are watching the roads. Let them watch, Vivi said with more confidence than she felt. Jacob will get through. I hope you are right, because if he does not... Doc did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. That night, Vivi barely slept. She lay in the small guest room, listening to the wind in the pines, one hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. Strong kicks, like the child was already fighting. We will be all right, she whispered. Whatever happens, we will be all right. And somewhere on the trail to Denver, Jacob Stone rode through the darkness carrying hope and evidence and the weight of promises he intended to keep. The Mountain King was going to war, and God help anyone who stood in his way. The trail to Denver was 200 miles of frozen hell. Jacob pushed Red hard the first day, covering 70 miles before the light failed. He made camp in a stand of pines, no fire chewing dried venison, and watching his back trail for signs of pursuit. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of men. He was back in the saddle before dawn. The second day brought the first test. Jacob was crossing a narrow ridge when he saw them. 3 riders blocking the trail ahead. They were not trying to hide. That was the first sign of trouble. Men with legitimate business did not set up ambush positions in plain sight. He reined Red to a stop and considered his options. The ridge dropped away steep on both sides. No way around, only through. The lead rider was a big man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. He held a rifle across his saddle, casual but ready. That is far enough, friend. Trail is open to all, Jacob said. Not today, it ain't. Mr. Blackthorn sends his regards. Says you got something that belongs to him. So, word had traveled fast. Blackthorn had men watching, waiting, ready to intercept anyone who might threaten his operation. Jacob's hand rested easy on his thigh, inches from his colt. Don't have anything of Blackthorn's. Just riding through. See, that is where you are wrong. Scarface shifted in his saddle. Everything in these mountains belongs to Mr. Blackthorn. One way or another, now you can hand over whatever papers you are carrying and ride back to Silverton. Or we can take them off your corpse, your choice. Third option, Jacob said quietly. What is that? You move aside and nobody dies today. Scarface laughed. His companions joined in. 3 against 1, old man. You ain't that good. Yes, Jacob said. I am. He drew and fired in one motion. The first shot took Scarface in the shoulder, spinning him out of the saddle. The second shot hit the man on the left before he could bring his rifle up clean through the chest. The third man got his gun clear and fired wild. The bullet whined past Jacob's ear close enough to feel the heat. Jacob's return shot caught him in the belly. He folded over his saddle horn and slid to the ground. The whole thing took maybe 4 seconds. Red had not moved. Good horse. Steady in gunfire. Jacob had trained him well. Scarface was still alive, clutching his shoulder and cursing. Jacob dismounted, kicked the man's rifle away, and knelt beside him. "Tell Blackthorne this," Jacob said, his voice cold and flat. "Tell him federal law is coming. Tell him every crime has a reckoning. And tell him the Mountain King does not forget." He remounted and rode past without looking back. The man on the left was dead. The man with the belly wound would be soon. Scarface might live if he got help fast. Jacob did not feel good about the killing, but he did not feel bad either. They had made their choice. He had made his. In the mountains, choices had consequences. He reached Denver on the afternoon of the third day. The city sprawled across the plains like something dropped from another world. Brick buildings, paved streets, gas lights, telegraph wires. The noise hit him first. Wagons and carriages, shouting vendors, factory whistles. After 2 years of mountain silence, it was almost painful. Jacob left Red at a livery stable with instructions for proper care and money to insure it. Then he made his way to the federal building, a 3-story structure of red brick and white stone that looked like it was trying too hard to impress. Inside, a clerk with spectacles and ink-stained fingers looked him up and down with obvious distaste. "Can I help you?" "Need to see Marshal Gideon Crane." "The marshal is a very busy man. Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Then I am afraid." Jacob pulled the oilskin pouch from his coat and laid it on the desk. "Got evidence of federal crimes, land fraud, forgery, murder. Marshal will want to see this." The clerk's expression shifted from disdain to uncertainty. "I will see if he is available. Wait here." 20 minutes later, Jacob sat across a desk from Marshal Gideon Crane. Crane was 50 years old with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen every variety of human wickedness. He wore a black suit and a silver star and an expression of permanent skepticism. He read through Doc's evidence, Vivi's deed, Reverend Thornhill's ledger, his face growing harder with each page. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied Jacob. "You ride 3 days to bring me this?" "Yes, sir." "Why, Bo?" "Because it is right, and because a pregnant widow asked for help." Something flickered in Crane's eyes, approval maybe, or just recognition of truth when he heard it. "Tell me everything, from the beginning, leave nothing out." So Jacob told it, the wagon wreck, Vivi's broken leg, Blackthorne's threats, the fire, Doc's investigation, the pattern of fraud spreading through Silverton like rot through timber. Crane listened without interrupting. When Jacob finished, the marshal stood and walked to his window, hands clasped behind his back. "Silas Blackthorne," he said finally. "I know that name. We have been tracking him for 2 years. He operates under different names in different territories, but the pattern is always the same. Buy land cheap through fraud and intimidation. Sell high when development comes. He has done this in 7 territories that we know of, made hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then why hasn't he been stopped? Because he is smart. He moves often, uses local corruption to shield himself, and until now we never had enough evidence to build a federal case that would stick." Crane turned from the window. "This changes things. Your doctor friend did good work gathering testimony. This ledger from the Reverend shows a clear pattern. And most importantly, this deed comparison proves forgery. So you will come, I will come, but I need to organize a proper response. Deputies, warrants. We do this by the book or it falls apart in court." He pulled out a calendar. "I can have a team ready in 3 days. We ride to Silverton together." 3 days might be too long. Blackthorne is getting desperate. "Then the people of Silverton will need to hold the line for 3 days. Crane met Jacob's eyes. "Can they do that?" Jacob thought of Vivi's fierce determination, Doc's quiet courage, Reverend Thornhill's moral certainty, the families who had already been cheated who would not want to see others suffer the same fate. "They can hold," he said, "if they know help is coming." "Help is coming, you have my word." Jacob stood. That is all I need. One more thing, Mr. Stone. Crane pulled a badge from his desk drawer. Federal law allows me to deputize civilians in emergency situations. Consider yourself deputized. If Blackthorn forces action before I arrive, you will have legal authority to act. Jacob took the badge. It was heavier than he expected. Not the metal, the weight of what it represented. He left the federal building as the sun was setting. Should have felt relief. Instead, he felt only urgency. 3 days, anything could happen in 3 days. He found a telegraph office and sent a wire to Silverton addressed to Dr. Marcus Finn. Help coming, stop. 3 days, stop. Hold the line, stop. Then he slept in a boarding house bed that felt too soft after years of rope and deer hide. And when he woke before dawn, he was already thinking about the ride back, about Vivi, about what he would find when he returned. While Jacob was in Denver, Silverton was not idle. Vivi sat in Reverend Thornhill's parlor with a decision burning in her chest. Outside, snow fell in lazy spirals, muffling the world. I need to go back for the carriage, she said. Ruth Thornhill looked up from her sewing. Child, your leg will heal whether I am here or there, but that carriage won't rebuild itself. Vivi's hands were clenched tight in her lap. My husband hid evidence in it, important evidence, carved into the wood itself, ciphers and codes that prove what Blackthorn has done. We need it. Dr. Finn had been listening from the corner. The ravine is 2 miles from town, snow-covered, no easy way to transport a destroyed carriage back here. Then I rebuild it there. Vivi's voice was steady despite the fear. Enough to move. Jacob showed me the basics of wheelwright work. I know upholstery. I can do this. You are 6 months pregnant with a broken leg, Ruth said gently. I know what I am. I also know what I have to do. Vivi stood balancing carefully. Thomas died protecting this evidence. I won't let that mean nothing. The room was quiet. Finally, Reverend Thornhill spoke. I will take you tomorrow morning. We bring tools, materials, whatever you need. I will help however I can. Caleb, Ruth started. The girl is right, Ruth. Sometimes faith means trusting that God put us exactly where we need to be. She needs to do this, and we will help her do it. The next morning came cold and clear. Reverend Thornhill hitched his wagon with blankets and tools and lumber. Dr. Finn added medical supplies in case Vivi's leg worsened. 3 miners from the church volunteered to help with heavy lifting. Good men who had been cheated by Blackthorn and wanted to see justice done. They reached the ravine by mid-morning. The carriage lay where Jacob had left it, half buried in new snow, looking like the corpse of something magnificent. Vivi stood at the edge of the ravine, staring down at it, and felt her throat tighten. It had been her grandfather's masterwork. Built in Boston in 1855, designed for both elegance and durability, tiger maple wood brass fittings upholstery that would have cost a working man's 6 months' wages. He had given it to Vivi's mother, who had passed it to Vivi, who had loaded it with everything she owned and started west to build a new life. Now it lay broken, but not beyond repair. Let's bring her up, Vivi said. The miners rigged ropes and pulleys. It took 2 hours of hard work, but they hauled the carriage out of the ravine and set it upright in a clearing. Snow was cleared. A canvas tarp was strung between trees to provide shelter from weather, and Vivi began to assess the damage. The left front wheel was destroyed, spokes shattered, rim bent. The axle had cracked. The carriage body had split along one side where it hit rocks. The door hung from one hinge. Upholstery was torn, stuffing spilling out like entrails. But the frame was intact. The craftsmanship was sound. It could be rebuilt. Vivi ran her hands over the tiger maple, feeling the grain, remembering what Thomas had taught her in those last weeks. How to read the patterns, where to look for the hidden marks. And there she found the first one. A series of small burns in the wood, nearly invisible unless you knew what to seek. Not random, deliberate, code. Her hands trembled as she traced the pattern. This was Thomas's handwriting in wood and fire, his last testimony. What do you see? Reverend Thornhill asked gently. Everything, Vivi whispered. I see everything he tried to tell me. For the next 3 days, Vivi worked. The miners helped with the heavy tasks, lifting, holding timber steady, operating the saw for large cuts. But the skilled work, the precise work, fell to Vivi. She attacked it with an intensity that surprised everyone, including herself. First, the wheel. Reverend Thornhill had brought oak planks from the lumberyard. Vivi measured and marked using the broken wheel as template. The miners cut the felloes, the curved segments that would form the rim. Vivi shaped them with a draw knife, working carefully despite her awkward position, forced to sit with her splinted leg extended. The work was hard. Her hands blistered, her back ached. The baby kicked and shifted, making everything more difficult. But she did not stop. She remembered Jacob in his cabin, the quiet competence of his movements, the way he had splinted her leg with practiced skill, the way his scarred hands had worked leather and wood like it was natural as breathing. You build what you need, he had said once, then you build what matters. This mattered. By the second day, she was shaping spokes. 12 per wheel, each one carved from straight-grained oak, tapered and fitted into the hub, with precision that would have made a master carpenter nod approval. The miners watched her work with growing respect. You got a gift for this, ma'am, one said. Not a gift, just necessity. Necessity makes us capable of things we never imagined. The wheel took 2 days to build. When it was done, Vivi fit the iron tire herself, heating it in a fire the miners built, shrinking it onto the rim with precision that came from understanding how materials worked, how heat expanded metal, how cold contracted it. The wheel was not perfect, but it was strong. It would hold. On the third day, she turned to the carriage body. The split in the side was the real challenge. Vivi cleaned the wound in the wood, removing splinters and debris. Then she cut a reinforcement from oak plank, shaped it to fit the curve, and glued it in place with hide glue the Reverend had brought from town. While the glue dried, she worked on upholstery. This was her domain. This was what she knew. She salvaged what fabric she could. The rest she replaced with material from her carpet bag, cutting her own dresses apart to provide covering. It would not be beautiful, but it would be functional, and while she worked, she searched. Every piece of wood she touched, she examined for Thomas's marks. The burns, the careful cuts disguised as wear, the cipher he had taught her to read. She found the second layer on the third day. It was carved into the underside of the seat, hidden where only someone looking would find it. A series of numbers and letters that looked random, but were not. Vivi had the key. Thomas had given it to her a week before he died, made her memorize it, made her promise never to write it down. She decoded it slowly, letter by letter, while the miners worked on repairing the axle. What she read made her blood run cold. Thomas had witnessed a massacre. 2 years ago, Blackthorn had claimed a series of mining properties north of Silverton. The previous owners, a group of 23 miners working a cooperative claim, had refused to sell. So Blackthorn had poisoned their water supply with arsenic. 23 men dead in 3 days, blamed on cholera, buried in a mass grave. Their claims transferred to Blackthorn through forged documents that made it look like he had purchased the land before they died. Thomas had been surveying for the railroad at the time. He had seen the bodies, seen Blackthorn's men at the well, put the pieces together, and he had documented everything. Where the bodies were buried, the names of Blackthorn's men involved, the forged documents, dates, details, all of it hidden in the carriage in cipher that only Vivi could read. She sat back, hand pressed to her mouth, feeling sick. 23 murders, not fraud, not just land theft, mass murder. Mrs. Ashford, Reverend Thornhill's voice was concerned. Are you well? No. Vivi's voice shook, but I will be. We all will be once we stop this man. She worked faster after that. The carriage was not beautiful when she finished. The new wheel did not quite match the others. The replaced upholstery was patchwork, multiple fabrics stitched together. The body bore the scars of its fall and reconstruction, but it was whole. It was functional, and most importantly, it now carried proof of crimes that would hang a man. On the evening of the third day, they hitched the carriage to Reverend Thornhill's horses and brought it back to Silverton. The town watched them come up the main street. Word had spread. The widow was rebuilding her inheritance. The pregnant woman was not waiting to be rescued. She was fighting back. People came out of shops and homes to see, to bear witness. Vivi sat in the driver's seat, reins in her hands, spine straight despite the pain in her leg. The carriage creaked and swayed on its mismatched wheels, but it moved. They parked it in front of the church. Dr. Finn was waiting. Jacob sent a telegram. He is coming back with Marshal Crane. 3 days. 3 days, Vivi repeated. We can hold 3 days. But Blackthorn had other plans. That night, 4 of his men came to the church. They carried torches and rifles. The leader was the same man who had tried to break into Vivi's window at the boarding house. His arm was in a sling from where Jacob had broken it. "Mrs. Ashford," he called out, "Mr. Blackthorn wants to talk, peaceful-like. Just come out and we can settle this civilized." Vivi stood at the church door with Dr. Finn and Reverend Thornhill flanking her. "Tell Mr. Blackthorn I have nothing to say to him." "That is a shame because Mr. Blackthorn, he don't take no for an answer." The man gestured to the carriage parked in front of the church. "Nice work fixing that up. Be a shame if something happened to it. Accidents happen all the time in mining towns. Fires, explosions, people getting hurt." "Is that a threat?" Dr. Finn stepped forward. "Just stating facts, Doc. Way I see it, Mrs. Ashford can sell her land to Mr. Blackthorn fair and square, or things can get complicated. And nobody wants complications. Get off church property." Reverend Thornhill's voice carried the authority of a man who had spoken to God and was not impressed by earthly thugs. Now the men laughed, started to turn away. Then one of them raised his torch toward the carriage. The gunshot cracked loud in the night. The torch spun out of the man's hand, hit the ground 10 feet away. He yelped and stumbled back, clutching his wrist. Sheriff Coleman stepped out of the shadows, rifle smoking. "Reverend Thornhill said leave. So you boys leave. Right now." The 4 men stared at him. "Sheriff, you work for Mr. Blackthorn. I work for the law, and the law says get gone before I arrest the lot of you for trespassing and attempted arson." They left. When they were gone, Sheriff Coleman lowered his rifle and turned to face the small group at the church. "I know what you all think of me. Know I've been taking Blackthorn's money, looking the other way while he cheated good people. Then why stop now?" Dr. Finn's voice was cold. "Because I got daughters, 2 of them, and I don't want to look them in the eye and tell them their father was a coward when it mattered." He handed his rifle to Reverend Thornhill. "I'm done with Blackthorn. Whatever you need, I'm with you." Vivi felt tears sting her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. When Blackthorn finds out I switched sides, things are going to get ugly against." He was right. The next morning, Blackthorn himself came to town. He rode in with 12 armed men, and the message was clear. No more subtlety, no more pretending at civility. This was raw power backed by guns. They set up in the street in front of the church. Blackthorn sat his horse like a general surveying a battlefield. "Mrs. Ashford," he called out, "this has gone on long enough. I am making one final offer. Sell me your land for $500. Take the money and leave town. This ends peacefully." Vivi stepped out onto the church steps. Her legs still hurt, but she stood without support. The carriage sat behind her, visible proof of what she had accomplished. "No, Dane, you are making a mistake, a serious mistake. The only mistake is thinking I am afraid of you." Blackthorn's face hardened. "You should be. I have killed better people than you for less reason." "I know you have. 23 miners, poisoned, buried in a mass grave north of here. My husband documented everything." The words fell like stones. Blackthorn's expression shifted. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and what showed underneath was something cold and reptilian. "You have no proof." "I have all the proof I need, carved into wood, written in code, and a federal marshal is on his way to collect it." "No marshal is coming. You are bluffing." "Am I?" Vivi gestured to the carriage. "This is my inheritance. My grandfather built it. My husband hid the truth in it, and I rebuilt it with my own hands to carry that truth to justice. So yes, Marshal Crane is coming. And when he arrives, you are finished." Blackthorn stared at her, at the carriage, at the small group of people standing with her. Then he smiled, and it was the most frightening thing Vivi had ever seen. "I don't think so," he said quietly. "I think accidents are about to happen, starting now." He wheeled his horse and rode away. His 12 men followed. "That was brave," Dr. Finn said. "Also possibly foolish." "Possibly," Vivi agreed. Her hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. "But I am done being afraid." That afternoon, 3 buildings caught fire simultaneously. The general store, the boarding house, the livery stable. The whole town turned out to fight the flames, bucket brigades working frantically. They saved the general store and the livery. The boarding house burned to the ground for the second time in a week. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. Blackthorn was done playing. That night, the church filled with families, women and children, old men, the miners who had helped Vivi rebuild the carriage. They came seeking shelter, seeking safety in numbers. Reverend Thornhill stood at the pulpit. "We are going to hold this building, together, until the marshal arrives. Anyone who wants to leave, leave now. No shame in it." No one left. Dr. Finn organized watches. Sheriff Coleman positioned men with rifles at the windows. Vivi helped prepare food and 10 children moving through the crowd, offering what comfort she could. Around midnight, one of the watchers saw a movement. "They are coming." 20 men on horses moving through the darkness toward the church. They carried torches and rifles in the confidence of men who had never been told no. Blackthorn rode at the front. They stopped 50 yards from the church, just out of rifle range. Blackthorn's voice carried in the cold night air. "Last chance. Send out Mrs. Ashford and her carriage. Everyone else can live. Refuse and we burn you out." Inside the church, people looked at Vivi. She stood slowly, using a pew for support. "No one is surrendering. Not me. Not this building. Not this town." "They will kill us," someone whispered. "Maybe, but we die free. We die standing up." Vivi's voice grew stronger. "I came to this town with nothing but a broken carriage in a dream. You all helped me rebuild both. Now it is my turn to stand with you." Reverend Thornhill moved to the door. "Mr. Blackthorn, your answer is no. This is God's house. You want it, you will have to take it over our dead bodies." "That can be arranged." The first shots came a moment later. Bullets punched through wooden shutters. Glass shattered. People screamed and dove for cover. Sheriff Coleman and the miners returned fire from the windows. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Children cried. Women prayed. Men reloaded rifles with shaking hands. The siege had begun. It lasted 2 hours. Blackthorn's men circled the church, firing from multiple positions, trying to find a weakness. But the church was stone foundation with thick timber walls. It had been built to last, and it held. Torches were thrown. They rolled off the slanted roof, landing in the snow and guttering out. A group tried to rush the front door. Sheriff Coleman and 3 miners met them with rifle fire. 2 of Blackthorn's men went down. The rest retreated. Inside, Dr. Finn moved from person to person, treating minor wounds. A woman caught flying glass in her arm. A man took a ricochet off the stone and needed stitches. Nothing fatal, not yet. Vivi helped where she could. Her seamstress skills turned to stitching flesh instead of fabric. Her hands stayed steady even as her heart raced. Outside, Blackthorn grew frustrated. "Burn it," he ordered. "Set fire to the whole thing." His men moved forward with oil and torches. That was when the sound came. Distant at first, then closer. The thunder of hooves on frozen ground. Blackthorn turned suddenly uncertain. And out of the darkness came riders. 6 men in federal blue. Marshal Gideon Crane in the lead. And beside him, rifle ready and eyes blazing, Jacob Stone. They had ridden through the night, pushed their horses to the edge of breaking, made the 3-day journey in 2. They were not too late. "Federal Marshal," Crane's voice boomed across the space. "Cease fire or be shot as criminals resisting arrest." The shooting stopped. Blackthorn's men looked at each other, looked at their boss. Some started backing away. "This is a misunderstanding, Marshal," Blackthorn called out, his voice smooth again, the mask back in place. "These people are trespassing on property I legally own. You were simply about to burn a church full of civilians." Crane's voice was hard as iron. "I have warrants for your arrest, Silas Blackthorn. Multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and murder. You will surrender yourself and your men immediately." "On whose testimony? A hysterical widow and some country doctor?" "On the testimony of 23 dead miners you poisoned, and the sworn statement of those families you defrauded, and the physical evidence currently sitting in that church behind me." Crane gestured to his deputies. "Secure the prisoners." It happened fast after that. Blackthorn's men threw down their weapons, eager to save their own skins. They were professional thugs, not fanatics. They would testify against their boss to avoid the rope. But Blackthorn himself sat his horse perfectly still, calculating one final move. His hand drifted towards his coat. "Don't," Jacob said quietly. He had not raised his rifle, but the warning in his voice was clear. Blackthorn looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. Saw not a mountain man, but a warrior. Someone who had killed before and would kill again if necessary. "The Mountain King," Blackthorn said. "I underestimated you." "You did. I could have made you rich. Partners? I don't partner with murderers." Blackthorn's hand kept moving toward his coat. "Then I suppose this is where it ends." He drew a derringer small and deadly and swung it toward the church, toward Vivi standing visible in the doorway. Jacob's rifle came up and fired in the same instant. The bullet took Blackthorn in the chest, dead center, knocking him backward out of the saddle. He hit the ground and did not move again. The derringer lay in the snow beside him unfired. Silence fell like a blanket over Silverton. Marshal Crane dismounted and checked the body, looked up at Jacob and nodded once. Clean kill. Justified. Jacob lowered his rifle and walked toward the church, toward Vivi. She was running now, broken leg forgotten, moving down the steps as fast as she could. And when she reached him, she threw her arms around him and held on like he was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. "You came back," she whispered against his chest. "Promised I would. I rebuilt the carriage, found all the evidence, everything Thomas hid." "I know. I saw." Jacob held her carefully, aware of her belly pressed between them, aware of the life they had both fought to protect. "You did good, Vivi. Real good." Marshal Crane approached deputies securing Blackthorn's men in chains. "Mr. Stone, Mrs. Ashford, I will need your statements, all the evidence. We have a long night ahead cataloging everything for trial." "The men who are left will testify," Vivi asked. "They will sing like canaries to save their own necks. Between their testimony, the documents, and what you found in that carriage, we have enough to prosecute Blackthorn's entire operation. The men he worked with, the officials he bribed, all of it. And the families he cheated. Their land will be restored, with interest. Federal court will see to it." Crane looked at the church, at the people emerging slowly, faces still shocked. "You all held the line. That took courage." "Had no choice," Sheriff Coleman said, coming down the steps. "Man's got to stand for something eventually." Crane studied the sheriff. "You helped them." "I did." "After taking Blackthorn's money for how long?" "Too long. I am ready to face whatever consequences come." Crane considered this. "You will testify against Blackthorn's network, against everyone you helped. Full disclosure." "Yes, sir." "Do that, and I will put in a word with the territorial governor. Might keep you out of prison, might not. But it is a chance. That is all I deserve." Chance. Dawn was breaking over Silverton when the marshal finally finished taking initial statements. Blackthorn's body had been removed. His men sat chained in a makeshift jail. The church still stood scarred, but whole. Vivi sat on the church steps, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Jacob sat beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now the law does its job. Trials, testimony, justice." Jacob looked at her. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to build my dress shop, raise my baby, live the life Thomas and I planned." She paused. "What about you? Back to your mountain?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment. The sun was rising, painting the mountains gold and rose, beautiful and eternal, and utterly indifferent to human struggle. "I have been thinking," he said finally, "about what it means to be the Mountain King, what that title really means. What does it mean? I thought it meant being alone, being strong enough not to need anyone. But watching you these past days rebuilding that carriage with a broken leg and a baby coming, and more courage than sense." He smiled a little. "I think maybe being a king means something different. Means protecting what matters, building what endures, standing with people instead of above them." Vivi's hand found his. "Are you saying you want to stay?" "I am saying I want to try. If you will have me, help you build that shop, help raise that baby, see what we might build together. That baby is not yours. I know, but if you are willing, I would like the chance to be there anyway, to be whatever you need me to be." Vivi turned to face him, fully green eyes searching his face. "You are sure this is not the mountain? This is town life, people, noise, complications. I have had enough of mountains and silence. Time to try something new. Then yes, Vivi said. Yes, I would like that very much. They sat together as the sun climbed higher, warming the frozen world. Around them, Silverton was waking to a new day, a better day, one where justice had been done and the future looked possible again. The carriage sat in front of the church, scarred and patched but whole, a monument to survival. To the skill that built it, the courage that rebuilt it, and the truth it carried. Some things once broken could not be repaired, but some things could be rebuilt stronger than before. And sometimes the people who did the rebuilding found they had reconstructed more than just wood and wheels. They had rebuilt hope. The Mountain King had found his kingdom after all, and it was not empty wilderness, but a town full of people worth fighting for. A woman worth standing beside, a future worth building with his own two hands. Justice, when it finally came, moved with the slow deliberation of mountain ice. Inevitable, crushing, unstoppable. The trials began 3 weeks after Blackthorn's death. Marshal Crane had been thorough. Warrants were issued for 17 men across 4 territories. Federal prosecutors arrived from Denver with leather satchels full of evidence. The courtroom in Silverton was not large enough, so they held proceedings in the church that had withstood the siege. Fitting, Reverend Thornhill said, "Let justice be done in a house of God." Sheriff Coleman testified first. He sat in the witness chair, hands folded in his lap, and told everything. The bribes, the threats, the times he had looked away while good people were cheated. His voice never wavered, but his shame was visible in every word. "How much did Blackthorn pay you?" the prosecutor asked. $500 over 6 months, and the promise of a cut when he sold the properties. "What made you change sides?" Coleman was quiet for a moment. "My daughters. I looked at them one morning and realized I was teaching them that money matters more than right. Could not live with that." The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. Coleman was sentenced to 2 years supervised probation and banned from law enforcement for life. He accepted it without protest, started working at the lumber mill the next day. The other men who had worked for Blackthorn fared worse. 3 were sentenced to 10 years hard labor for arson and attempted murder. 2 more got 5 years for assault. The rest received varying sentences based on their cooperation and the severity of their crimes. But the real victory came when the federal court validated every land claim Blackthorn had stolen. 12 families got their property back, with compensation for improvements they had been forced to abandon, with interest, with an apology from the territorial governor himself. Vivi's land was confirmed as legally hers. 40 acres on the south edge of Silverton, with a clear water source and road access, and a view of the mountains that made her throat tighten every time she saw it. "What will you build first?" Dr. Finn asked one afternoon as they stood on the property. "The shop," Vivi said without hesitation. "Then a small house, then whatever comes next." She had plans, detailed sketches she had drawn during the long nights waiting for Jacob to return from Denver. A 2-story building, shop on the ground floor, living quarters above. Room for the baby, room for growth, room for possibility. Jacob studied her drawings with the eye of a man who understood construction. Good design, solid foundation plan. You thought about the roof pitch. Snow load, I learned. Colorado is not Boston. He smiled at that. The smile was coming easier now, less rare, like spring thaw after a long winter. "I can build this," he said. "We can build this. Together." Together, the word that had changed everything. They broke ground in April when the mud dried enough to work. Jacob designed the foundation laying stone with the precision of a master. The church sent volunteers. Miners donated labor on their days off. What had started as one woman's dream became the town's project. Silverton was rebuilding itself, not just structures, but spirit. The poison Blackthorn had spread was being drawn out, replaced with something cleaner, something that felt like hope. And in the center of it all was the carriage. Vivi had refused to dismantle it for parts even though the wood was valuable and the brass fittings could be sold. Instead, she kept it whole, parked it beside the construction site like a monument. "People need to see it," she explained to Jacob one evening. "Need to remember that broken things can be made whole again." He understood, more than she knew. His own brokenness was healing. The cabin in the high country sat empty, now slowly being reclaimed by wilderness. Jacob had moved into a room at Reverend Thornhill's house close enough to help Vivi, close enough to be there when she needed him, which was often. The pregnancy was advancing. Vivi was in her 8th month now, moving carefully, her balance shifting as the baby grew. Dr. Finn checked on her weekly, pronounced both mother and child healthy, warned her to rest more. She ignored him. There was too much to do. The shop's frame went up in May, sturdy timber, straight and true. Jacob taught Vivi how to notch joints properly, how to read wood grain for strength, how to trust the mathematics of load and balance. "Your hands know this work," he said, watching her measure a beam. "Just needed someone to show you the language." "Thomas tried to teach me carpentry once. I was terrible at it." "You were not ready then. Now you are." She looked at him, a man who had become so essential to her life in such a short time. "How do you know?" "Because you rebuilt a carriage with a broken leg and a baby coming and a killer threatening you. After that framing, a building is easy." The walls went up in June. Jacob worked with quiet intensity, each board placed with care. And as he built, he integrated pieces of the carriage. The tiger maple became interior trim, beautiful and distinctive. The brass fittings were repurposed as door handles and window latches. The leather from the seats was crafted into a sign that hung above the shop door, Ashford Designs. "You are putting the whole carriage into this building," Vivi observed. "Some of it, the important parts, the pieces that carried you here, that held Thomas's truth, that survived the fall and the fire and everything else." Jacob ran his hand over a section of tiger maple. "Seemed right, making it part of what you build next." Vivi felt tears sting her eyes. Pregnancy made her emotional, but this was more than hormones. This was seeing someone understand her heart without her having to explain it. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For knowing what matters." The baby came on a Tuesday in late June. Vivi had been feeling odd all morning, small pains that came and went. She ignored them, working on upholstery for the shop's chairs, her needle moving through fabric with practiced rhythm. By noon, the pains were stronger, regular. By 2 in the afternoon, her water broke. Ruth Thornhill found her doubled over in the shop, gripping a workbench, breathing hard through a contraction. "Lord have mercy, child. How long have you been in labor?" "Since morning. I thought it was just—" Another contraction hit. Vivi gasped. "Martha, fetch Dr. Finn," Ruth called to Martha Hayes, who had been helping with the upholstery. "And find Jacob, quickly." They got Vivi upstairs to the newly finished living quarters. The room was spare but clean. A bed Jacob had built from pine, a rocking chair, curtains Vivi had sewn from yellow calico. Everything simple and ready. Dr. Finn arrived within minutes, his medical bag already in hand. He examined Vivi quickly, efficiently, then looked up with concern. "The baby is breech, feet first instead of head. We need to turn it, or this will be very difficult." "Can you turn it?" Ruth asked. "I can try, but I need help. Strong hands, someone who will not panic." "I am here," Jacob said from the doorway. He looked terrified. His face was pale beneath his beard, his hands clenched tight at his sides. But he stepped into the room without hesitation. "Have you delivered a baby before?" Doc asked. "Calves, foals. Once helped with a difficult birth at a homestead during the war. Human baby is different, but the principle is the same." "The principle is exactly the same. Keep the mother calm. Do what I tell you and pray." For the next 4 hours, Jacob learned what real fear meant. Not the fear of bullets or blades, not the fear of winter storms or hostile territory. This was the fear of being utterly helpless while someone you cared for suffered. Vivi labored with fierce determination. She did not scream, though Jacob could see the pain was immense. She breathed through contractions, gripped his hand hard enough to leave marks, trusted him to be strong when she needed strength. Dr. Finn worked to turn the baby, his hands gentle but firm on Vivi's belly. Almost there. Almost. Just a little more. And then finally success. "Head down. We are ready. Vivi, when the next contraction comes, you push, hard as you can." What followed was primal and terrifying and beautiful. Vivi pushed. Jacob supported her, one arm around her back, letting her lean into his strength. Dr. Finn coached and encouraged and waited with the patience of a man who had done this 100 times. "I can see the head. One more. One more big push." Vivi bore down with everything she had left. And suddenly there was a cry, high and angry and perfect. "It is a girl, yo," Doc said, his voice thick with emotion. "A healthy baby girl." He placed the infant on Vivi's chest, still connected by the cord covered in birth and blood and the mystery of new life. Vivi's hands came up to hold her daughter, trembling, reverent. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, Emma. I am your mother." Jacob stood frozen, watching. This tiny creature, impossibly small, impossibly perfect, opened her eyes and looked at the world for the first time. And something in Jacob's chest, something he thought had died with his wife 2 years ago, came back to life. After Doc cut the cord and cleaned the baby and made sure both mother and daughter were stable, after Ruth had changed the bedding and brought broth and made sure Vivi was comfortable, after all the urgent business of birth was complete, Doc handed the baby to Jacob. "Hold her while Vivi rests." Jacob took the bundle carefully, terrified he would break something. Emma was so small. She fit in his 2 hands with room to spare. She made soft, snuffling sounds, her tiny fingers curling and uncurling. He sat in the rocking chair, this man who had killed and hunted and survived things that would break lesser men, and held a newborn baby girl who was not his by blood, but felt like his anyway. "I failed my wife," he said quietly. Vivi was dozing, but he needed to say the words. Could not save her. Could not even get her to a doctor in time. Swore I would never care about anyone again because the pain of losing was too much. Emma yawned, impossibly small mouth opening wide. "But you and your mother changed that. Reminded me that life is not just about surviving. It is about being part of something larger. Building something that lasts." He touched Emma's tiny hand and her fingers wrapped around his thumb with a surprising strength. "I will not fail you, little one. Either of you. That is my promise." Dr. Finn, packing his instruments, glanced at Jacob and smiled. "You are going to be a fine father." "I am not her father. Maybe not by blood, but fatherhood is not about blood. It is about showing up. And you, Jacob Stone, have been showing up since the day you pulled Vivi from that ravine." Over the next weeks, Jacob learned the rhythms of life with a newborn. The midnight feedings, the endless diaper changes, the way Emma would only settle if he walked her around the room bouncing, gently humming old songs he barely remembered learning. He finished the shop during Emma's naps, working quietly so as not to wake her. Vivi recovered slowly, her body healing from the ordeal of birth. She sewed when she had energy, preparing inventory for the shop's opening. Baby clothes, simple dresses, alterations and repairs. Word spread. The widow who had fought Blackthorn was opening for business. Women came to see, to order, to support. Within a month, Vivi had more work than she could handle. "I need to hire help," she told Jacob one evening. They were sitting on the porch of the shop watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Emma dozed in Vivi's arms, milk-drunk and peaceful. "Martha has been looking for work since the boarding house burned," Jacob suggested. "Martha is perfect, and maybe one of the younger women from church. Someone I can train." Jacob watched her, this woman who refused to be defeated by anything. "You are building an empire. I am building a living. There is a difference. Not the way you do it." She smiled at that, reached over and took his hand. We are building a living. You built this shop. You helped deliver Emma. You have been here every day. I want to be here every day. If you will have me." Vivi looked at him directly. "Jacob Stone, are you asking what I think you are asking? I am asking if you would consider marrying me. Not because you need my help. You are plenty capable on your own. But because I have come to care for you and Emma more than I thought possible. Because building a life together seems like the right kind of future. People will talk. I am still in mourning for Thomas. Let them talk. Thomas was a good man and you honor his memory every day. But he is gone and we are here and life is too short to waste on propriety." Vivi was quiet for a long moment, looking at Emma, looking at the shop, looking at the mountains. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I will marry you." They wed in September when Emma was 3 months old, and Vivi's mourning period was respectfully complete. The ceremony was small, just close friends in the church that had sheltered them during the siege. Reverend Thornhill performed the service, his voice full of joy. Emma slept through the whole thing, held by Ruth, oblivious to the significance. Jacob wore a new suit, his first in 10 years. Vivi Bunny wore a dress she had made herself, deep blue silk that brought out her eyes. No veil, no pretense. Just two people choosing each other in front of witnesses who mattered. "Do you, Jacob Stone, take this woman to be your wife?" "I do." "And do you, Vivian Ashford, take this man to be your husband?" "I do." Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Jacob kissed her gently, carefully, like she was something precious that might break. She kissed him back with more force, reminding him she was strong, that they were equals in this. The town celebrated, food and music and dancing in the street. Martha cried. Dr. Finn made a speech about love and second chances. Sheriff Coleman, working at the lumber mill, now raised a glass in tribute. And the next morning, Jacob started building their house. He chose a site on Vivi's land a quarter-mile from the shop, high enough for a view, close enough to water, sheltered by pines from the worst winter winds. The foundation stones came from the ravine where the carriage had wrecked. Seemed appropriate, building something permanent from the place where everything changed. The framed timbers came from the lumber mill, but Jacob selected each one personally. No knots, no warping, only the straightest, strongest wood. And for the interior, he used the carriage. The last of the tiger maple became floor planks in the main room. Beautiful and distinctive, they caught light like water. The seats remaining leather became chair cushions. The iron wheel rims were forged into hinges and latches. Every piece integrated with purpose, with respect, with the understanding that objects carry history and history shapes what comes next. The house rose slowly. Jacob did most of the work himself, but help came. Miners after their shifts, church volunteers on weekends. The community that had fought together now built together. By November, it was complete. 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen where Vivi could cook and Jacob could work on small carpentry projects. A parlor with windows facing the mountains. Everything solid and well-made and built to last generations. They moved in on a Tuesday. Emma was 6 months old now, sitting up on her own, laughing at everything. She seemed to love the new house, crawling from room to room, exploring with fearless curiosity. That first night in their home, Jacob stood at the window watching snow fall. Vivi came up beside him, Emma already asleep upstairs. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I spent 2 years on that mountain convincing myself I was better off alone, that needing people was weakness, that caring was just setting myself up for more loss. And now I know I was wrong. The strength is not in standing alone. It is in standing with someone, building something together that is bigger than either of you could make alone." Vivi leaned against him. "Thomas would have liked you." "I hope so. He loved you. That is enough for me to respect him. He left me Emma in the carriage and the truth that brought down Blackthorn. That is a good legacy. The best kind. The kind that protects people who come after." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching snow cover their new land, their new life, the future they were building, board by board, day by day. Time moved forward the way time always does, relentless and gentle in equal measure. Emma grew, learned to walk at 10 months early and determined, learned to talk at a year, her first word, Papa, directed at Jacob. He cried, denied it later. But Vivi had seen. The shop thrived. Martha proved a skilled assistant. A young woman named Sarah joined them, learning the seamstress trade with dedication. They could barely keep up with demand. Silverton grew too. The railroad came through in 1886, bringing prosperity and complication in equal measure. New businesses opened. Population doubled. The quiet mining town became a hub of commerce. Through it all, Jacob and Vivi remained constants, building, teaching, raising Emma with love and discipline, and the understanding that work well done was its own reward. On Emma's 3rd birthday, Jacob started teaching her woodworking. "She is too young," Vivi protested. "I was younger when my father taught me. Start early, go slow, build skill over time." He showed Emma how to hold a piece of wood, how to feel the grain, how to see the shape hidden inside waiting to be revealed. She listened with fierce concentration, her small face serious. "This was part of the carriage," Jacob explained, holding a scrap of tiger maple. "The one your mother rebuilt. The one that carried truth and justice and brought our family together." "Tell the story," Emma demanded. At 3, she already loved stories. So Jacob told it. The wagon wreck, the rescue, the broken leg, and the mountain cabin. The villain and the siege and the marshal arriving just in time. He simplified it for her age but kept the truth intact. "Your mother is the bravest person I ever met. She rebuilt that carriage piece by piece when everyone said it could not be done. And in doing so, she taught me that broken things can be made whole again. Emma touched the wood reverently. Can I make something? What do you want to make? A box for treasures. Jacob smiled. A box is a good first project. We will make it together. They worked side by side through that spring and summer, Jacob teaching, Emma learning. The box grew slowly, precisely, each joint fitted properly, each corner square. When it was finished, Emma painted it herself, flowers and birds and mountains, child art bright and joyful. What will you keep in it? Vivi asked. Memories, Emma said seriously, important things. She was her mother's daughter. The years turned. Emma started school, learned to read with the same fierce determination she brought to everything, helped in the shop after classes learning to sew alongside carpentry. Learning that skill came in many forms. Jacob taught her to track, to hunt, to survive in wilderness if needed, but also to build, to create, to make things that would outlast her. Why is that important? Emma asked one day. She was 7 now, all sharp questions and sharper observations. Because we are here for such a short time. But what we build, what we teach, what we leave behind, that lasts. Your mother's shop will serve this town for 50 years if it is maintained. This house will shelter people long after we are gone. And you, when you are grown, you will build things and teach things and pass on what you learned. What if I do not want to build or sew? Then you will find your own way to make a mark. But whatever you do, do it well. Do it with care. Do it in a way that makes the world a little better than you found it. Emma considered this. Like Mother with the Carriage. Exactly like Mother with the Carriage. In 1888, when Emma was 4, Silverton held a celebration. 5 years since Blackthorn's defeat. 5 years of honest growth and prosperity. The town had tripled in size, but it had kept its soul. The church still stood as its moral center. The families Blackthorn had cheated were thriving on reclaimed land. Justice had been done, and the town had not forgotten. They erected a monument in front of the church, a simple stone marker with names carved deep. The 23 miners Blackthorn had murdered, the families he had cheated, and at the bottom a single line, broken things rebuilt. Vivi stood looking at it with Emma on her hip and Jacob beside her. The girl was heavier now, too big to carry comfortably, but Vivi held her anyway. Some moments required closeness. Why does it say broken things rebuilt? Emma asked. Because that is what this town did, Vivi explained. We were broken by a bad man, but we rebuilt ourselves, stronger, better, together, like the carriage. Yes, sweetheart, like the carriage. Dr. Finn joined them, older now, grayer, but still sharp. You should be proud, Vivi. What you started here changed everything. I did not start anything. I just refused to be defeated. Same thing, Jacob said quietly. That evening they held a party. Food and music filled the street. Children ran wild while adults talked and laughed and remembered how far they had come. Marshall Crane was there visiting from Denver. He had been promoted over Saw, a larger territory now, but he made time to return for the celebration. This town is a model, he told the gathered crowd. What you accomplished here, standing against corruption, rebuilding after destruction, is exactly what the West needs. You should all be proud. Later, when the crowd thinned and Emma was asleep on Jacob's shoulder, Crane pulled Vivi aside. I wanted you to know, Blackthorn's network is completely dismantled. We caught the last of his associates 3 months ago. 7 territories cleaned up. Hundreds of families got their land back. It started here with you refusing to surrender. I was terrified the whole time. Courage is not lack of fear, it is acting despite fear. You did that, and your daughter will grow up knowing her mother was a hero. Vivi looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the weight of history. I hope she just grows up knowing love. The rest is secondary. 5 more years passed in the way years do when life is full and good. The shop expanded. Vivi hired 4 seamstresses, started training apprentices, built a reputation that reached beyond Silverton. Women came from Denver to commission dresses. Her designs were sought after, celebrated. Jacob's carpentry business grew alongside it. He took on apprentices too, teaching young men the skills that built towns. Precision, patience, pride in work well done. Together they were prosperous. Not wealthy, but comfortable, able to save, able to give, able to build a life that mattered. Emma thrived. At 10, she could sew a straight seam and cut a dovetail joint, could track a deer and bake bread, could read Shakespeare and calculate compound interest. She was being prepared for a world that was changing fast, being given every tool her parents could provide, and she was curious about everything. "Tell me about the carriage again," she would say. It was her favorite story, requested, often never tiring of the details. Jacob and Vivi would take turns narrating. The wreck, the rescue, the rebuilding, the siege, the justice, how broken pieces became something whole and beautiful and strong. "Do we still have any of it?" Emma asked once. "You are standing on it," Jacob said. They were in the house in the main room with its tiger maple floor, and touching it, the door handle, and sitting on it, the chair cushions made from the carriage seats. Emma looked around with new eyes. "It is everywhere. Not everywhere, but in the important places. Reminder that what breaks can be rebuilt, what ends can begin again, what is lost can be transformed into something new." On Emma's 10th birthday in 1894, Jacob presented her with a special gift. It was a workbench, child-sized but built to adult standards, solid oak, precise joinery, a vise at one corner, tool storage below, and inlaid in the top a panel of tiger maple from the original carriage. "This is yours," Jacob said, "to learn on, to grow with, to use for whatever you decide to build in your life." Emma ran her hands over the wood, feeling the grain, the history embedded in every fiber. "Thank you, Papa." The word still caught him sometimes. Papa. Not by blood, but by choice, and that made it more precious somehow. "There is one more thing." He pulled a leather pouch from his pocket. Inside were tools, small versions of his own. Saw a plain chisel square, everything she would need to begin. "These were mine when I was your age. My father gave them to me. Now I give them to you. Use them well, keep them sharp, and someday when you have someone to teach, pass them on." Emma looked at him with serious eyes, 10 years old and already understanding the weight of legacy. "I will. I promise, Wifraz." That night after Emma was asleep, Vivi found Jacob on the porch looking at the mountains in the moonlight. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Same question as always. Same comfort in the asking. That we built something good here. That Emma will carry it forward. That maybe my life was not wasted after all. "Your life was never wasted. Before you it was. I was just existing, surviving, going through motions." He pulled her close. "You taught me the difference between surviving and living, between hiding and building, between being alone and being part of something larger." "We taught each other," Vivi corrected. "I was broken too, lost, afraid. You showed me strength I did not know I had." They stood together, this couple who had found each other in crisis and built a life in the aftermath, looking at the town they had helped save, the home they had constructed, the daughter sleeping upstairs who represented hope and continuity and all the possibility of tomorrow. The carriage was gone now, fully integrated into the structures of their life, but its spirit remained. In every board Jacob placed, in every seam Vivi stitched, in every lesson they taught Emma Arthur about perseverance and transformation and the sacred work of rebuilding. Some stories end with once upon a time. This one ended with what came after the rescue, after the fight, after the victory, the long, quiet work of building a life worth living, the daily choices that accumulate into legacy. Years continued to pass. Emma grew into a young woman of fierce intelligence and compassion. She did not follow the expected path of marriage and domesticity. Instead, at 18, she left for Denver to study law, to fight injustice with legal weapons the way her mother had fought it with courage and her father with carpenter's skill. "I want to be a lawyer," she told them before she left. "Help people the way Marshall Crane helped us. Make sure what happened with Blackthorn never happens again." Jacob and Vivi stood on the porch watching her ride away toward her future and felt the peculiar pride and pain of parents releasing a child to become who she was meant to be. "Did we do well?" Vivi asked. "We did perfectly," Jacob said. "We gave her roots and wings. The rest is up to her." In 1923, 40 years after the carriage first wrecked in a Colorado ravine, Emma Ashford Stone stood in that same ravine with her own daughter. She was 40 now, a successful attorney who had indeed fought land fraud and corruption across 3 states. She had married a good man, a surveyor who shared her passion for justice. They had 3 children, and the middle daughter named Vivian, after her grandmother was particularly curious about family history. "Is this where it happened, Mother?" young Vivian asked, 15 years old and already showing signs of the fierce determination that ran in the family. "This is where it happened, where your grandmother's carriage wrecked, where your grandfather saved her, where everything began." Emma looked at the ravine, softer now with 4 decades of growth. Trees had reclaimed the space. "You would never know tragedy had occurred here unless someone told you." "Grandmother rebuilt the carriage," young Vivian said. It was not a question. She had heard the story 100 times. "She did, piece by piece, with a broken leg and a baby coming and death threats from a murderer. She rebuilt it because it held truth, and truth matters more than fear." "What happened to the carriage?" "It became a house and a shop, and a reminder that nothing is ever truly broken beyond repair if you have courage and skill and people who stand with you." Emma pulled a small wooden box from her satchel, the one Jacob had helped her make when she was 3. Painted flowers fading now but still whole. Inside were treasures collected over 50 years. A scrap of tiger maple, a brass fitting, a piece of the original upholstery, pieces of the carriage saved and kept and carried forward. "These are for you," Emma said, handing the box to her daughter. "Part of your inheritance. Not money, not property, but something more important. The reminder that our family was built on resilience, on refusing to surrender, on the sacred work of making broken things whole." Young Vivian took the box reverently. "I will keep them safe. More than that, learn from them. Let them teach you that whatever challenges you face, whatever breaks in your life, you have the strength to rebuild. It is in your blood. Your grandmother proved it. Your grandfather proved it. And now it is your turn to carry that forward." They stood together in the ravine, 3 generations of women connected by story and strength, and the understanding that some legacies are not inherited but earned through living with courage. Far away in Silverton, the shop still operated under different ownership. The house Jacob built still stood solid and true. And somewhere in the foundation of both tiger maple and brass and leather remained integrated an essential testament to what one woman rebuilt and what one man helped preserve. The Mountain King and his queen were gone now, buried side by side on a hill overlooking the town they helped save. Their marker was simple: Jacob Stone, 1850 to 1921, Vivian Ashford Stone, 1858 to 1920. They rebuilt what was broken, but their legacy lived in the buildings they constructed, in the skills they taught, in the daughter they raised, and the grandchildren who carried their names and their courage forward into an uncertain future. Amama stood in the ravine until the sun began to set, then led her daughter back toward town, toward the ongoing work of living with purpose, toward whatever needed building next. Behind them, the mountain stood eternal, witness to all human struggle, indifferent to triumph and tragedy alike. But in their shadow, people still built, still fought, still refused to surrender, still took broken things and made them whole again. And that, more than any monument or marker, was the true inheritance. Not what they left behind, but what they taught forward. The understanding that being strong enough to build matters more than being too proud to break. That community trumps isolation. That love transforms loss. That the sacred work of reconstruction of carriages of lives of hope itself is never finished, but always worth attempting. Generation after generation. Forever.